Hello everybody, welcome to another Albums of the Month video. Today I'll be going over the worst, the alright and the best albums of March 2024 that I have not covered on a separate video. So these ones will be included within this. So as usual, we start off with the worst albums and build ourselves up to the alright and best. The worst ones will be the records I just don't enjoy or think they're just a bit too weak, or just as an overall experience just doesn't hold up as well as I think. So the first album for the worst we have is Glasgow Eyes, the brand new one by the Jesus and Mary chain. Honestly, this album has guys problems. I think a lot of it stems from the fact they're leaning more with a synth sound, which isn't a bad thing, but when the songs just don't really feel complete and just feel like there should be more to it, it's not a good sign. I feel like that's kind of the polish this album had to kind of wrap everything up, because a lot of it to me just feels like demo tracks just lumped onto a record. Just some weak production as well. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of it. The mixing is a little bit off, but I think as a whole it's not a terrible album, but there's like a few good songs if I'm gonna be completely honest, and even then that's kind of stretching it a bit. This album is just kind of disappointing to listen to. I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5 because there's much worse things than this. Honestly, I'm not actually fully surprised that Gossip would be in my bottom, or at least my worst albums of the month, but I need to address something. It's not that I purely dislike Gossip, I actually don't mind it, but Gossip has not really been something that I found myself enjoying much, especially with the last record back in 2012, A Joyful Noise. So let's give this one some benefit of the doubt though. This has taken a 12-year gap, first of all, and there's been a lot more time dedicated to writing this one. It's pretty much a return for Gossip, and I will say it is a much more preferred direction. But that being said, I just think a lot of the instrumentation, some of the refrain sort of hooks just do not work necessarily. I don't think there's really anything that captured the sort of classic days when you had tracks like Standing in the Way of Control, which is a quite iconic one, obviously being one of Gossip's biggest songs. But I just think here there is not really anything close to that, and I think with this whole album it just doesn't really have much to offer once you get through the single tracks. It's just kind of a weak album. It's not a terrible album, but I think it's one that I would put on my worst list. It's a bit of a disappointing one. I give it a 2 out of 5. Sheer Mag also makes the worst albums list, the brand new one playing favourites. So the gimmick with this band is they play a lot more of a guitar oriented flow, so it's mainly focused on the guitars, as well as it's more of a dance-y sort of indie blend. I think Sheer Mag has some decent ideas, but this album is just as simple as it can get. There's not really much to it. I think if you're not really a big fan of Sheer Mag beforehand, I don't see how this album would be any different. It just sounds like Sheer Mag, and it's yeah, I should also mention that Sheer Mag, if the name sounds weird, I'm pretty sure if you swap the M and the SH around, it's Mearshag, but I don't know if I had to explain that. I don't know if it's quite obvious or not, but this is just not a good album. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. Unfortunately, this album ended up making the worst list for this month, and it's kind of a shame too, because I think it had a really promising start. But the brand new band, Whom Gods Destroy, released their debut, Insanium, and I think honestly it's a not that good prog metal album. I think it's got some good elements, but it feels like this is pretty much the sequel to Sons of Apollo, and I think the direction that this has been taking it has led to some weaker writing. I think the songwriting's a lot weaker. While there is some great instrumentation, I don't think it's necessarily enough to save the weaker points this record has. I think there are some fun to be had, honestly, and I think I can see people enjoying it, but it is just kind of bland and barren with some of the stuff. I think after you pass the first 2 tracks, you're just greeted with a trio of weaker material, and I think the only thing that even came close to pulling me back in from the second half is Crucifier. But I must say this is a more disappointing and underwhelming record. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. Next we're moving on to the alright albums of the month. These are the ones that I think aren't quite bad enough to be in the weaker territory or not strong enough to be in the good territory. They kind of feel like they belong in the middle, like there's nothing absolutely terrible or nothing absolutely crazy. It's just kind of a, you know, standard listen experience where you might have some enjoyment, you might not, you just kind of feel mixed on things. And to start this off, we have the new one by Everything, Mountainhead. Yeah, what can I say about this one? I think it's got some great writing. I think the choruses are good, but as a whole, I think it's just fine. The instrumentation doesn't blow me away or anything. I think as you're just going through this album, it just feels a bit too filled with stuff. So some of it to me just feels like filler, doesn't need to be on here. But at the same time, I can kind of vibe with this record as well. I feel like the tracks are definitely good, are just, you know, good enough to listen to. And there's nothing necessarily I hate, but I'd just say it's an album I feel is a bit bloated, and that kind of dampens my experience a little bit. The first few tracks are kind of a little hit or miss, but as soon as it goes to Buddy Come Over, my interest in the album does raise a bit. I think there's some decent ideas, especially towards the second half where you got some of the better tracks, but for where I stand, Everything, it's you know, it's worth the listen. I just don't think it's a incredibly great album or anything, so that's why I put it in this tier. It's alright. Another alright album we have is the brand new one by New Year's Day, Half Black Heart. I think what they offer, and I think there's definitely the energy there, is good, but I think for the overall record, it doesn't really give you that consistency of good writing, or at least great ideas. Like, it's somewhat consistent, but I don't think anything on here is absolutely fantastic. It just kind of feels like a natural flow that this album is just kind of going for. I think there's some alright moments, but I definitely think one of the things that pulled me off and kind of made me unsure when I first started this was the first track, Vampire. The chorus definitely sounds like Psycho by Ask Alexandria, and I'm not really a big fan of Psycho. It's just that I remember having to listen to that quite a lot, so that's kind of ingrained into my brain, so that didn't really help. But after that point, you kind of not getting the Ask Alexandria sound from the chorus, so I'm kind of happy, but still I just found that vaguely similar. I think this album's fine. I don't really have much else to say. It's just a decent album, I guess. Another alright album we have is the new one by DragonForce, Warp Speed Warriors. Yeah, this one's just kind of alright. I think this is pretty much at this point a below average experience from DragonForce. You've kind of heard the best of their sound back in the earlier period when the band was pretty much around the inhumane rampage of releasing Through the Fire and Flames. Just there's some good stuff, but unfortunately this album is just average DragonForce at this point. But it's not even that, it's a new era of DragonForce they've been kind of going for this point. You can definitely tell they're kind of running out of ideas. This power metal sound of theirs is just kind of prolonged and dragged on. It's just nothing original anymore. It's just kind of just a whatever experience. I suppose it's not too bad if this is like your first listen to DragonForce, but if you have listened to this band prior to this, maybe if you're a big fan, I can see people being disappointed. All in all though, I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's just alright. Next for the alright we have Big Big Train's new record, The Likes of Us. I was probably saving this one for the albums I missed, but I did give this one a listen, and I thought, well, at that point, what's the point of waiting like almost a whole year to talk about it if I can just put in this video? So The Likes of Us, Big Big Train isn't too bad. I think it's got some cool ideas, especially with the longer tracks. Beneath the Masts definitely utilises the almost 18-minute runtime of this song pretty well. There's definitely some progressive elements that I think pushes on with some ideas. Probably the best tracks will probably be a mixture of either Oblivion or Mirror, which I like Mirror. I think this one has some great instrumentation, especially towards the end. I think it just excels in just a fun, nice way. I think there's some heavier stuff that they bring into this, but at the same time they keep it nice, chill. just a bit more of a calmer mood, and I think it works great, but as a whole of the album, I just don't think I can vibe with it as much as I've seen other people enjoying it, which is cool to see that. But when it comes to progressive rock, I think Pineapple Thief's sound is something I feel just captivates a lot more of the fresh ideas, whereas this just kind of feels a bit more familiar, just a little bit less unique. It just kind of feels like stuff that I think is just kind of average to good, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing to have a bit more of a basic album, but to me this one's alright. I just don't think it's as crazy as it could be, but for what it offers, I think it's fine, and I've never listened to Big Train before, so for a first listen, it's not too bad, it's just alright. Another one on the list we have is Myrath Karma. So this is the new album from them. I wasn't really planning on reviewing it for this video. I would think I was just going to leave this for the albums I missed, but I wanted to talk about it, especially since this album has been leaked for over 6 months, I believe. So there's that going with it. I think this album is fine. There's some good ideas. I think especially with the first few songs, you kind of get the gist of the poppy power metal sound they're going for. There's some great ideas, some just fun vocal performances as well. They definitely get the melodic tone of it done right, and I think for the most part it's an experience I think is decent, but it doesn't really go anywhere too far. It's not as ambitious as I thought it'd be. It doesn't absolutely reel you in. It's just kind of a standard fine album, I guess. So I kind of felt alright was the best category I could put this one in. Finally, we're moving on to the best albums of the month. These are the ones that I think are great to just fantastic. Pretty much stuff that I want to kind of go back into a lot more than the alright and weakest albums that we have. But let's start off the best with probably the best album of the year so far. This one is a bold claim for me to make that, but I'm just saying this is an incredibly great album. The new one by Defocus, There Is a Place for Me on Earth, is fantastic. I really enjoyed this one. It's so refreshing to hear a gen metalcore album with just so much ambition and just so many creative, fun ideas. The first thing I've noticed with Defocus is that there's a lot more electronic elements implemented here, not to the point where the sound shifts to a more electronical sound, but there's just enough to just tinker around and just give you a whole palette of unique ideas. The first 5 songs are just a frenzy, track by track, full of harsh vocals, intense energy, some fantastic riffs, and some amazing breakdowns hidden, especially in the one of the biggest singles that we had off the record, Crooked Mind. This one is just insane. Every track actually just has so much distinguishable features and some very iconic moments that just stand out completely, just absolute highlights track to track. There is literally almost no weakness with this one. The second half of the album is a little bit tamer in this sort of direction. You have Don't Let It Hurt Me, which kind of goes for a little bit of a calmer collective state, and there's even a few other tracks that do that as well, like There's a Place for Me on Earth, but there's still intense energy trapped inside of it that just unleashes, and it's just insane when it does. And it doesn't even mean that the second half is not as heavy. There's still tracks like Flatlines, and Hybrid Anthem is a great one, which has a feature 1 RF to do some vocal delivery, and I want to be honest, I'd probably say that's probably the weakest track is Hybrid Anthem, but it still excels, and especially going into to Not Feel Anything, which is more of like an interlude track. Even that one stands out as a track, especially towards the end. I just love the way it just kind of incorporates this little industrial interlude to go into Flatlines with one of the most chaotic songs I think Defocus have made. This album is insane. I was going to do a separate review on it, but I didn't necessarily have the time to, so I just wanted to kind of compile it into this video just so I didn't forget where I was, because I didn't have as much time to edit as I'm recording it. But yeah, Defocus, this album is so good. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. It is definitely the best album I've heard this year. That we've had Casey, we've had some great ones by Normandy, a great one by Normandy, Charcoal Grace by Caligula's Horse. But yeah, this is probably the strongest album I've heard this year. Insanely good. Definitely a great album for sure, no doubt. And yeah, as I said, 4.5 out of 5. Just Yeah, I honestly can see this one being album of the year for sure. Another good album of March we have is the brand new one by Aborted with Vault of Horrors. Now, the big thing that really stood out to me with this record, this one is pretty obvious just by looking at the track list, that every song has a featured artist. Pretty much all artists from other deathcore, death metal bands. So I find it really interesting that they kind of use this as a blend to give you a bit more of diversity and some fun ideas. Unfortunately for me, I don't think they necessarily push the boundaries for some of the best sounds on this record. I think that the features definitely do a good job of adding their own sort of twists and turns to this record, but I feel it's still limited to mainly trying to be what Aborted is pushing for. And obviously you want an Aborted album to sound like Aborted, but I just don't think there's really much difference other than just these features kind of popping in here and there. Matter of fact, because they still keep to the structure of the deathcore, death metal sound that Aborted is going for, it's limiting on these actual unique ideas it's bringing to it. It's a good record though. I think if you can just look past the features, in my opinion, some of them are good, but they're not like impressively great features. I think it still is a concrete album nonetheless. But yeah, I'd say just all around overall, 10 tracks, all 10 of them are good. It's a 3 out of 5 for me. I do think it's good. Another good album we have is the brand new one by Crushed by Waves, More to Life. So if you haven't heard of this band, this is their debut record, and I didn't really know what to expect. But going back into it, I think it's a good take on the kind of traditional hard rock sound a lot of bands have been going for. It definitely has that mainstream appeal to it, but I think it's also got a little bit more depth to push it into some decent to fun writing. There's also a lot of vocal moments that just feel very weird, like in a good way weird, but then also it's just hard to comprehend. Like in Nothing Left, the vocals kind of remind me of Don Broco a little bit, and then it goes into something that kind of reminds me of Bring Me the Horizon, just a little bit, not a huge amount. And then with tracks like Faces and Lies, you get more of the Uncleans, and the Uncleans just sound more like Ed Shikari's Uncleans. I think it's just like a little bit of weirdness here. Obviously some vocals in Fry Screaming will sound the same, but I just think the way it is here is just kind of gives a little bit more of that fun edge. And I think especially with the Uncleans, they give this more of a sort of post-hardcore sound towards the second half at least, which I think is the better half of the record. A lot of better tracks. If I'm being honest, I think for a debut it's got everything it needs to be. It can be much better, but I also think for what it offers, it is a good experience. Yeah, a bit more on the mainstream than I'd expect, but I think it's pretty good overall. I'll give it a 3.5. Next we got a brand new album by Boundaries. This is Death is a Little More. Honestly, this album is insanely brilliant. There is so much to unravel with one listen, and then going into it again and again, you're just treating yourself with this pure bliss of ecstasy. There's a lot of adrenaline and just a lot of anger, as well as pure emotion, just packed into the 12 tracks we have here. This is an insanely brilliant record with honestly nothing to drag on, or just, it doesn't even feel like there's anything that would be filler. There's 12 pure songs of just overall joy that just rolls the narrative, from turning hate into rage to inhale the grief. Especially the last words, to inhale the grief, is honestly, it kind of describes the album as a whole. When the final bit is, I feel like a fuck up, I feel like a failure, but at least it's not every day and I'm getting better. There's clearly building around to a positive, so it's not just, oh, I'm pure emotion, like, oh, this is all awful, my life's in ruins, because it definitely shows that the vocalist is trying to better themselves. So I honestly appreciate the kind of writing that this record takes. I think the production is pure crisp. I think the instrumentations just absolutely excel, some really good riffs, and yeah, of course, vocals are just phenomenal. This record is fantastic. It's not my favourite album though. I'd say it's a close second to Defocus, as I do really enjoy that record a bit more. But yeah, Death is Little More is one of the best albums of the year, and I can clearly see this being a lot of people's album of the year. So if it is, I'm not even blaming you at all, because it is a really good pick. And yeah, I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5. It's really good. We got a new album by Grayscale Season. I believe this is their 4th record, Feel Something New, and this one is quite short. Probably their shortest album. It's only 8 songs and it's less than 30 minutes. So this is one that plays with foul sort of sound instead of proper gen. It goes for more of that foul stuff. You get more of a spooky, mysterious aesthetic. For those who don't really know necessarily what it is, it's hard to honestly compare the two. Foul, gen, I don't know, but it's a band that I just stumbled upon, and I think I thought I'd put them for this list in the video at least. So this album is good. I honestly went into it thinking it would be a lot better than I actually came out thinking about it, because while it has got some great ideas, I think you'll really hit with the best stuff at the first bit. I like the way they contrast to the uncleans and cleans. They use the cleans not too much, but they don't use it in a sparse moments. They definitely just make it work every time it needs to, but I feel like there's some elements that could go a bit harder. The instrumentation is fantastic, but I think the vocals, while there is some great range, I just don't think the refrain with some of the refrains stick out to me quite as much. There's still some really good vocal passages, but I find this album isn't quite as much to the hype as it was, but I still can see why people like this one a lot. I still like this one quite a bit, so that's why it's in my best albums of the month. This is my 3.5 out of 5 score album. We got a new one by Atrophy, which is insane because this is the first album they've released in 34 years. So this is a band that's just released only their 3rd record, but they've been going since the 1980s. Honestly, their sound is great for what they bring in. There's definitely old school elements of thrash metal here, but they just give it such a new polish to the sound that it just makes it really intriguing. It just gives you a really fun listen all the way through. I'm not normally the biggest fan of thrash. There's some great thrash bands out there like Slayer and Anthrax, but in my opinion, I really did not expect this one to be as good as it was. I actually think this is probably one of the best thrash albums we've had in a little while. Asylum is just definitely a great record, and it's really cool to hear from a band after so long as well. So yeah, that's good in my opinion. I think every track is definitely worth a listen. Pretty good album. I give it a 4 out of 5, honestly. Just surprised that Atrophy's released a new album. The last thing I have for the video is Ride, Interplay for the best. I think it's not crazy good, but when it comes to this alt rock sound with some sort of indie vibes sinking in, as well as a bit of shoegaze and tracks like Light in a Quiet Room, I think it gives the album a bit more of a kind of interesting buzz and vibe. The songs can be decent length to sometimes being a bit longer, but yeah, within the 12 tracks it's almost an hour-long record, and I think it does drive for some good ideas, but it's not as intriguing to me. I'd probably say it's the weakest that the best has to offer, but I still think it's worth the listen. I still think it's good enough to be here because it's definitely got some good vibes. It just makes for an overall just fun album to end up on. You can go for a ride with this one if you want. And that is all of the albums of March that I haven't been able to cover in a separate video, so this is the end of that. I've been a bit busy honestly when it comes to my job I've been doing since near the start of March, so this has been taking up quite a bit of time to review, but luckily with the 4 days off I keep getting, it's 4 on 4 off, I get time to do this. So yeah, this should be up hopefully before Easter, but if it's not, then I will try and get up April 1st. I'm just literally seeing how I can get around to getting this done, but yeah, that is my March albums of the month. I hope you all enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and let's see what April has in store for us.